Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Donahue. I'm the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice for the District of Columbia. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge a few of the people here with me today. Chief Peter Newsham of the Metropolitan Police Department, Dr. Francisco Diaz, Deputy Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Jennifer Love, anthropologist with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Jennifer Smith, Director of the Department of Forensic Sciences, and Matthew DeSarno, Special Agent in charge of the Criminal Division for the FBI's Washington Field Office. We are here today because our residents and families deserve answers, and with the help of federal partners, we've made progress in identifying all three sets of human remains that were recovered nearly 4 months ago at the 100 block of Wayne Street Southeast in Ward 8. In a few minutes, Dr. Diaz, Dr. Love, and Chief Newsham will provide details on the work of police and federal forensic investigators. After Chief Newsham speaks, we'll open up for questions. The impact of unsolved cases is permanent, is traumatic, and today marks one step in the recovery of human remains, and we will not stop until these deaths are brought to justice. Thank you for coming out today. Dr. Diaz.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I am Dr. Francisco Diaz. I'm the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner here at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Washington, D.C., and we're here to announce the names of those three ladies whose skeletal remains were found last April. And the first name is Jewel King, who was last seen alive on April of 2006, and the last name is spelled K-I-N-G. The second name is Miss Verdell Johnson, and the first name is spelled V as in Victor, E-R, D as in David, E-double-L, and last name is Jefferson, and she was last seen alive on May of 2006. And the third name is Miss Dorothy Butts, and the last name is spelled B as in boy, U-T-T-S, and she was last seen alive in December of 2006 as well. The identification was performed by DNA comparison, and that was performed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation Laboratories. Due to the vision of our Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Roger Mitchell, and the support of our Mayor, Muriel, we have a full-time forensic anthropologist at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, and majority of the work, or an important part of the work in the identification profile is performed through biological comparisons. And that biological comparison was performed by our forensic anthropologist, which is Dr. Jennifer Love. And with that, I will leave with Dr. Jennifer Love, who's going to talk about the details of that biological comparison.
Thank you, Dr. Diaz. Yes, my name is Jennifer Love, and I'm the forensic anthropologist here at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. So in regards to the skeletal remains, my role was to develop the biological profile, which includes the basic description of the individual, the age, the sex, the stature of the individual. With that information, we were able to work with information from NAMUS, missing persons data, as well as MPD's missing persons department to identify possible matches. MPD then worked diligently to contact the next of kin of these missing individuals and collect reference samples that were then provided to the FBI, as well as the genetic relationship between the family members and the missing persons. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Newsham to further discuss MPD's role.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Love. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this important update regarding open homicide investigation. On Wednesday, April 25th, officers from the 7th District responded to the 100 block of Wayne Place Southeast a little before 3:30 p.m. After they got a 911 call by construction workers indicating they had discovered what they believed to be human remains, human skeletal remains on a job site. Upon arrival, officers observed the remains, called for additional resources, and secured the property for investigative purposes. As part of the requested additional resources, partners from DC Fire and EMS and Fairfax County came with cadaver dogs at the site so it could be thoroughly searched, both on the interior and the exterior. Personnel from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner's Office responded to the scene. They were able to determine that the remains were human and likely those of a female. As the investigation continued throughout the weekend, the remains of 2 additional females were located at an adjacent building in the unit block of the 100 block of Wayne Place Southeast 111. Because of the nature of the DNA testing that was required, MPD and OCME requested assistance from the FBI laboratory to confirm the identities of these women. The work done by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, who you just heard from, Dr. Love, to generate an accurate biographical profile was a critical piece of the identification process. On May 4th of this year, following an evaluation conducted by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, the deaths of the victims were ruled as homicides by manner of blunt force trauma and gunshot wound. At that point, detectives from the MPD's homicide branch assumed the lead for the investigative purposes. Detectives consulted with MPD's missing persons unit to identify potential cases that could be related to these homicides. The FBI, represented here today by Special Agent in Charge Matt DeCerno, expedited the testing in this case. I want to thank Matt and the lab down at Quantico for your quick work on this. Earlier today, following the positive identification of our decedents, members of MPD notified the families of the victims. The decedents, as you have heard, has been identified as 3 females in their 40s. They are all believed to have lived in close proximity to where the remains were discovered. And once again, they have been identified as Jewel King, who was a 48-year-old female from Southwest D.C., who was last seen on April 7th of 2006 in the area of the 100 block of Galveston Street Southwest. Jewel was initially reported by her mother on April 13th of 2006. She left behind 3 daughters. The second was Verdell Jefferson. She was a 41-year-old female. She was last seen on May 1st of 2006 on Wayne Place. She lived in the same block where she was discovered. Verdell was reported missing by her mother on August 1st of 2006. She was survived by 1 son. Our third victim is Dorothy Butts. She was a 43-year-old female from Southeast Washington, D.C. Dorothy was last seen on Christmas Day, December 25th of 2006 in the 3700 block of Martin Luther King Avenue Southeast. She was on her way to a local store. Dorothy was reported missing by her sister on the same day that she went missing, which was December 25th of 2006. She also left behind 1 son. We at MPD would like to express our condolences to the family and friends of the victims. Whenever you have a family member that goes missing, I am sure, regardless of how much time has passed, you are always hopeful that they will return. I am certain that this news is devastating to these families, and I again want to express my heartfelt condolences. The identification of the women in this case obviously will help in our investigation, but as you can imagine, there's still a tremendous amount of work ahead of us to find the person or the persons that are responsible for these murders. Homicide detectives will begin to identify if any of these 3 women were linked in any capacity. They will work to determine what link that the victims might have had to the location where they were found. They will speak to the victims' families and any associates in an attempt to piece together the circumstances that led to their deaths. They will also be reviewing records from that time period in 2006 to identify residents or potential witnesses who lived or were in and around the area at the time that these women went missing. We're also very hopeful that today's announcement will generate additional tips in this case. As always, if anyone has any information, they can call us on 202-727-9099, or they can text us on 50411. They can do that by either identifying themselves or giving the information anonymously. There will be a $25,000 reward for information that leads to the arrest and conviction of anyone that's associated with any of these women's murders. We can take any questions that you all might have.
2 questions. One of them for the doctor. After you develop the profile, that sort of narrows the number of missing persons cases you're looking at, right? So there's some number of reference samples that you collected of people who are missing based on the description or the profile that you developed. How many of those reference samples did you collect before you figured out, and then tested, from which you identified these three?
Do you want to answer?
Is it dozens, hundreds? I don't know.
It was 8?
Yeah, it wasn't dozens or hundreds, it was less than 10.
Less than
Yes.
10.
Yeah.
The other question, you said blunt force trauma and gunshot wounds. Was each individual victim suffered?
No,
each
it
of those?
appears that 2 of the victims died as the result of gunshot wounds, and 1 of the victims died as the result of blunt force trauma.
Which one was blunt force trauma?
The blunt force trauma was Verdell.
Are you investigating this as a possible serial killer? I know you're.
We would always consider that to be a potential in this case, but at this point, we don't even know. We believe that 2 of the victims died as the result of at least one suspect or one circumstance, because they were found together in a circumstance, and the doctor might be able to talk a little bit more about this, where there was not enough dirt between the 2 bodies that would indicate that they were put in there at separate times. So we believe that they were put in there, at least put in there at the same time, and probably are associated. But we don't know whether the body that was found in the crawl space and the 2 bodies that were later found are linked at this point. All that we know, I mean, there's a lot of information that would suggest that they are. We had 3 women similar in age, all went missing in the same year, and were all located in the same geographic vicinity. But other than that, we don't have anything to tie them together.
The 2 who were found close are those the 2 who were shot?
No, it's the one in the crawl space died of gunshot wounds. The cause was gunshot wounds, and then the other 2, one was the result of gunshot wounds, and one was the result of blunt force trauma.
You're talking about King and Jefferson, the 2 that were close together.
Yes.
So, Chief, do you know, did the 3 women know each other? Did they have any relationship to one another?
That will be part of our investigation. I mean, now that we have their names, we know who they are, we can talk to their family members, their associates, and we can determine whether or not these women had any association with each other.
Can you tell us if there were suspects at the time of their disappearance who you questioned, who you might be going back now to re-interview?
This was being looked at as a missing persons case. We didn't have any information to suggest that the women were murdered until we recovered the remains. So there's no persons of interest at this point.
Just to be clear, you said Verdell Jefferson was found, she lived on that block?
She did.
Okay, and the others did not?
Correct.
And then could you clarify, because you said the other 2
But
bodies...
I could tell you all 3 of the victims lived in fairly close proximity to where the remains were found. So they were all from that area.
So you said the other 2 victims, one was in the crawl space. You said the other 2 were in 111. I think we thought they were found in the backyard in the woods. The other 2 bodies were actually found...
That's the property is 111, so it's adjacent to
So
111.
not in the building like...
Correct.
Okay.
One was found in the building in the crawl space. 2 were found outside. Two were found together outside.
Okay. And then last week, your office was back out there digging in yet another location. Can you tell us what, if anything, you found and why you were back out looking as recently as last week?
I can tell you that they went out there because we had another dog hit in the area, and so we wanted to make sure if there were any other remains on the property that they would be located. The result of that search was negative. We didn't find any evidence.
Can you tell us if any of the bodies, were they clothed, were they bound, were they tied up together? Can you tell us anything about that?
We don't have a lot of detail on that we could share. If we had items of clothing or jewelry that we thought would help us in this case, we would make it public, but we don't have anything like that at this point that we want to share.
Chief, you said that you made you went to the families today. Can you tell us about that? You went to the families today?
Sam, I wasn't there. It's one of the hardest things that a homicide detective has to do is to tell a family that their loved one is not coming home. So I can't imagine it was very pleasant.
Chief, can you talk about how many questions you got from the public about, could this be my loved one? Has there been a lot of interest from the public?
Yeah, so in that regard, I think that there are a lot of folks who have loved ones that are missing in and around this region, and so to have them identify them is helpful in that regard for those folks who thought it might be their loved one. but they're still going to be in limbo until their loved one is found. And for the families that unfortunately got the news today, they know that their loved one is not going to be coming home. That's a good question. And I got to tell you, too, we right off the bat, when we first located the remains, we got a fair number of tips and information, but that has steadily petered out. We haven't received any information in recent days about this case. We're very hopeful that this public announcement, giving the names of the victims in this case, will be helpful in jarring somebody's memory as to what may have happened to them.
So, Chief, what is your request of the public right now who are going to hear this information this evening?
If you knew any one of these women, if you frequented the area or lived in the area of the 100 block of Wayne Place, if you were a delivery person and you delivered, or a mail carrier, or any of the like, and you were in that area during the year of 2006, you may have a bit of information that could be important to us. And so please give us a call. We'd like to interview you.
Were you able to obtain photos of these women?
I believe, do we have photos? Yes. Yes, I do believe we have photos.
Are we releasing those?
We'll take a look, and if that would be something we would do, yes, for sure.
The structure that the crawl space is in is a home, correct?
It's an apartment building, so it's a multi-family apartment building.
And is that where the one Jefferson resided, or just another?
No, there was one lived in the block, not in that building. All right.
Do you think there could be other victims out there buried somewhere in these neighborhoods?
We don't have anything right now to suggest that, so we're hopeful that there's not, but we're going to keep all possibilities open.
And the FBI's role was simply facilitating the DNA?
FBI was excellent in this case. We asked them for help in this case. They do mitochondrial DNA work. Our lab does not. Very few labs in the country do it. They reached out, they bent over backwards to assist us in this case, so I want to thank them again for doing that.
Just a little explainer real quick of what's that, is it family members' DNA that you have to use to match? How does that process work?
Yes, so it's family members' DNA that is compared to the missing persons, or to the skeletal remains in this case. So in this case, we had parents, we had siblings, and we had children that we were able to, the MPD was able to collect. And then the FBI did compare those samples to our skeletal cases.
And that's where you have the 8 people come into play that were possibilities?
Right, so there were 8 missing women that we collected, MPD collected DNA from the family members of 8 missing women. I believe it was around 8. And so the family members of those 8 women were compared to our 3 skeletal remains. 3 of the family members' DNA matched the 3 skeletal remains.
Were you able to, the profile you developed, was it any more specific than female in their 40s, or we owed to how long they've been dead? Just be a little bit more specific.
Sure. So the skeleton is, everyone's skeleton is unique, and it's a good, has a lot of characteristics of the individuals. And so, yes, the skeletal profile can include evidence of past injury and so forth. So, yes, so there are a lot of details that we can obtain from the skeleton that help us compare to descriptions of the missing persons.
Were you able to tell from the skeleton, for instance, how long they've been dead?
So that's very difficult. In this case, the skeletal material was excellent. And it depends on the environment the skeleton is in. So depending on the pH of the soil, can cause the bone to break down more quickly or to be preserved in some cases. So in this case, really we couldn't give a very narrow estimate based solely on the bone.
It just seems curious to me that the profile you developed, from that profile you were able to narrow down from however big the universe is of missing people to simply 8. I mean, how many people are we talking about? It might be hundreds, right? I mean, and from that you're able to, the profile must have been very specific.
MPD, I provided them what I had, the information I had, and they came back with 8 possible matches, and we went from there. So MPD worked with their information to.
You were able to give them an age range, for instance?
Oh, yes. So my age ranges were, for example, I believe, I can look at my notes, 35 to 45. So, you are still looking at a 10-year range estimate.
Last question?
And if I may, Dr. Love, I think that highlights the importance of forensic anthropology.
Dr. Diaz, come.
Yes. That highlights the importance of forensic anthropology because with that biological profile, you can develop a template and you can narrow down what you're looking for. Instead of looking at hundreds, you're looking just as a handful of people. Hence the importance of having a forensic anthropologist in a medical examiner setting.
Was there particular injuries they had? The evidence? The bones?
I don't think we want to talk about that kind of detail, because that could be helpful to our criminal investigation. So, but anyone else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.